So, welcome to our expert roundtable of top cybersecurity professionals. How is Ukraine defending itself against cyber attacks? My name is Lauri Koponen, and I am the communication manager at SSH Communications Security. I will be today the host and moderator of this event. Happy to be with you today in this discussion. Dear guests online, you can join the discussion here on the chat page and ask your questions there. I will raise the questions for the panelists and at the end. Let's keep the conversation active, relevant, and secure. A recording of this panel discussion, I mean roundtable, will be made available to you afterwards. I also encourage you to join the discussion on Twitter and LinkedIn using hashtags SSH or ESSP or cybersecurity. Let's proceed to our speakers. We have today with us from Ukraine, co-founder and CEO of ESSP, Roman Sologu. Then we have online also from Ukraine, Enterprise Solution Director at ESSP, Artem Mikhailov. Then we have here offline a member of the board of directors at SSH, Katarina Kandolin, and head of EMEA region at SSH, Rami Raulas. Welcome to all speakers. And as traditional, let's start with a warm-up round. If everybody could briefly introduce themselves and their background. Let's start from Roman, then Artem, then Katarina, and then Rami.
Hello, everyone. My name is Roman Sologu. I used to be a co-founder and a CEO at ISSP. We found our company in 2008. And I was among the first employees, as you can imagine. By my background, I am in cybersecurity commencing 2021. Once I started my studies in university for cybersecurity. And now I am happy to be the CEO and the leader of a company which works in 6 countries, providing cybersecurity services, education, and complex technical solutions. Thanks.
Just probably, Roman, not 2021, but 2001, right? This is when you started your educational career.
2001, right.
So yeah. More than 20 years, yeah. Yeah, so since I took a word quickly about myself, Artem Mikhailov, I am the probably 3rd employee in company back in 2008, 2009. I'm kind of lucky to observe the rise of cybersecurity as a market in Ukraine, the rise of ISSP, and I was not only observer, but let's say contributor to this process. My background is technical. I also graduated the same university as Roman, the cybersecurity faculty in Kyiv National Polytechnic Institute. And since then, together with Roman and with the team, we're growing our business in Ukraine and abroad. Again, I have a technical background, but most of the recent years I'm involved into the business development and product development. So I would try to address technical questions as well, if there be any. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Katarina Kandolin. I'm currently a board member here at SSH, but my daily job is at OP Group, that is in the finance sector. Before that, I spent some years at Nato HQ in Brussels, and I was also the chief of the cyber defense section at the Finnish Defense Forces. So in total, I worked within the defense sector for 15 years.
Yeah, and I'm Rami Raulas. Hello, everybody. Joined here is actually hired by our founder, Tatu Ylönen, 6 years ago. He happens to be the guy who invented a secure encrypted protocol for safe data transfers and connections called SSH, Secure Shell, which, by the way, is used, for instance, for Tesla cars remote access, as an example, so still valid and viable. So, and we deal with sensitive data, how to input, transfer, share sensitive data, and then access management, who, what, where, why, how access these critical data and systems. I also had the curiosity of having worked for about over 10 years in process industries, but also clearly understanding the criticality of production must not stop.
Okay. I hope our words are clear and everybody hears us. So we will proceed to agenda for the day as it follows. We will start with the snap analysis. What does the world of cybersecurity look like, and how has the current geopolitical situation and war in Ukraine shaped the environment in which organizations operate? We will continue with concrete examples and conclude by offering concrete, practical solutions to strengthen organizations' cybersecurity and counter cyber attacks. Let's start from the top. Rami, what are the trends in cybersecurity nowadays?
Yeah, I think from a big picture, you have to think of cyber war, and we have a specialist amongst us on that one. Then maybe cyber terrorism, polluting water, cutting off electricity from people. Then cyber crime, monetizing with data or blackmailing with ransomware, and the influencing part of influencing opinions with cyber attacks. So, but there was an interesting study by KPMG for CEOs end of last year, asking that what are the criticalities, critical blockers for organizational and companies' growth. So surprise, surprise, it's no longer just recruiting the right talent, sustainability topics, but actually cyber and cyber criminality, maybe more so, has risen to #1 topic. And it's also safety. Safety is really important in manufacturing environments, especially critical infrastructure. So cyber is also a safety issue, and it's also a sustainability issue, if you think about water and wastewater as an example. So it's on the top of minds of CEOs, CFOs, who typically are responsible for risk management in companies, and with board members like Katarina here as well, in terms of control and audit of companies' well-being. And then it's driven by the bad attacks that there have been. Just too many. We'll come to those maybe a bit later, focusing more on Ukraine, but and the lessons learned from there. But it's also driven by legislation and regulation. Network Information Security Directive, which is legislation soon in Europe, will encompass more companies, food production, chemical production, now other manufacturing. Finland is a paper country, so maybe manufacturing toilet paper will not be part of critical infrastructure. We'll see if that falls in that as a process industry. But it's about the operational efficiency. Like
Remy, I'm very sorry for interruption. It's just the sound. I think it's not only me. My colleagues are also texting me that maybe you could adjust something on your side. Maybe you could switch to another microphone.
Okay. We'll switch to another microphone, but then we'll make a little proceed with the program because your voice is clear. So, Roman and Artem, could you, in the meantime, we'll check our microphone, tell about the situation in Ukraine? How is the cyber war landscape in Ukraine nowadays, and what is, for example, Indestroyer or NotPetya?
Okay, cool. Roman, would you wish to start?
I can start commenting the situation. Well, first of all, I would like to say that cyber war in Ukraine has begun commencing 2014 with the Russian war in the east of Ukraine, and it was a hybrid war. So specifically for that period before the full-scale invasion, Ukraine has experienced cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, massive supply chain cyber attacks like NotPetya, malware, and other attacks against Ukrainian governmental bodies and authorities. Specifically, when in February 24th, when the invasion started, the amount of cyber attacks has grown, but for the initial 2 months. And for us to understand that we can only spot in an open media the official statements and claims about cyber attacks, and specifically in February, it was 55 claims or statements for cyber attacks. In March next month, it was 66. And then April, May, and June, the average amount was 25 to 30 official statements. Means that with the invasion, Russia-sponsored actors, basically they detonated the infrastructure that they have penetrated in advance, and we just we were observing the culmination of these cyber attacks, because cyber attack is an operation. However, currently we clearly see a lot of spear phishing campaigns and intrusion attempts. So it means that we can expect next waves coming around October probably, but this could be a massive, let's say, wiping or massive detonation of the infrastructures, or some data exfiltration or something similar. I cannot predict if this will be a kind of some massive effect, or they will act on their, let's say, objectives one by one, critical infrastructure or some other critical governmental assets like registries. But definitely cyber attacks and cyber war is about the persistence. So we expect more cyber attacks to happen.
Yeah, fully agree with you. I would probably maybe highlight, probably the question relates mostly to what were the obvious signs that the cyber war is going to transit into the conventional war, right, in traditional war. And as Roman said, I would even underline that we started to observe the first attack before 2014, right? And everything which has happened in Tallinn before, in Georgia in 2008, everything is, the pieces of the bigger puzzle. So since Ukraine was always, as we all now know, right, it's a public information, Ukraine always was in a target list of Russia. The attacks began even earlier, but and obviously we have observed during all way since that time, different intensiveness. Some months or some days were very massive with a lot of work and a lot of response. Some of them were less active, but personally for me, probably the attacks of January 16 of this year, they were, the indicator, the obvious indicator, which was very similar to what we have seen in 2014 before the actual war has started. This, massive attack against websites, defacing, right, which is quite, it's not very simple to deface at the same time, 20 or 30 websites. But still, from the security expertise perspective, it's not a very complicated attack. But when you have 20 government sites defaced with some special, not common for national understanding political message, you obviously think that something is going to happen big, right? So this was like an indicator for me at that time. Yes. How are you guys doing? Have you checked the microphone?
Yes, we change it. How about now, our voice?
Yeah,
it's
much
better?
more better. Yep.
Okay, beautiful. We're sorry for the little interruption, and let's keep on the topic. So thank you. And how have we seen also in Finland that the cyber attacks have also been seen in our all-day lives? Katarina, how has the cybersecurity environment and the world around us changed from your perspective? And what do you have some comments about Ukrainian situation?
Well, thank you. And actually, I have a kind of, this might be a provocative question though, but has it really changed, or is it so that our perception of it has changed? Yes, there is a war going on, and I would say that the cyber domain is being utilized to this extent for the first time in a conventional war. So yes, that is new. But if we look back, then already in 2014 did Russia attack Ukraine, and both prior and since there has been hybrid operations, so both information operations and cyber operations going on continuously. And sometimes it seems a little bit that we forget about this when we talk about this war now starting in 2022. And it seems that the Western world is now waking up. So, and our perception is now that the security situation has changed, but has it really changed? So that is one thing that I would like to bring up. I think one thing that we also see now is that there's a lot of targets on the critical infrastructure. Now, this should be no surprise either, because this has been part of Russia and other countries, but especially Russia's operational thinking to address the critical infrastructure, which has been seen also in Ukraine. And it has led to also, let's say, Finland, that the critical infrastructures in Finland has raised their preparedness now, both in relation to the war in Ukraine, but also Finland's decision to join NATO.
Yeah.
Actually, if I may add to that, Kari Suominen, an ex-colleague of mine who was the CIO for Fingrid, the Finnish national electricity grid backbone distribution, made a public statement. He actually said it earlier, that there are about a couple of dozen attacks on the Finnish national grid daily. Most of them are harmless phishing attempts, but there are real attempts in trying to get to the data or the control systems of our backbone. So it's reality every day. And that's why we have national, like Katarina said, national preparedness higher in terms of observing and catching these attacks before they happen.
Yeah, and actually a little bit also from Finnish perspective, and Katarina, your background, you said, and we know you have worked for NATO, how you think Finland's NATO accession process has affected our landscape or European landscape? Let's consider also the Swedish process.
Well, again, it's not like, Finland and Sweden decides to join NATO and suddenly things change. If we again go back for I don't know how many decades, then already the Soviet Union and then later Russia has always threatened Finland that if you decide to join NATO, then Russia will respond. And again, as the discussion in Finland started that perhaps we should join NATO, this was as the result of Russia attacking Ukraine, then there started to be support for NATO membership, first among the citizens, but then also in the parliament, and then eventually we made this decision. So it was expected, and even our security police were warning that now we might see more intense hybrid operations, so both information operations and cyber operations. What we have really seen so far has not been what we were expecting. So actually, if we look at it in total, there have been less activity in the cyber domain than it has been before. There has been some incidents. So for example, when President Zelensky was addressing the Finnish parliament, then at the same time, we had some air violation by the Russian Air Force. And we also saw some very technically simple denial of service attacks against the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would rather call them information operations than cyber operations, because they had no real effect on the working of the Foreign Ministry or the Defense Ministry, and even less on the Finnish Defense Forces. I would say that most people wouldn't even have noticed these attacks. The only thing that they caused was that the media noticed, so there was some news about it, and that perhaps gave the perception that now there is increased aggressiveness towards Finland. So hence it was an information operation, not a very effective one to that part. So I would say that the changes have not been as drastic as could have been expected and what the rhetoric has been before, at least to this point.
Do you have, Roman or Artem, something to add?
I would love to comment quickly if you don't mind, Roman. I would start. Rami just said about the phishing campaigns with critical infrastructure operator experiences regularly, right? I would say that in Ukraine we stopped tracking a phishing campaign as a separate entity. We have a constant layer of very massive phishing all the time. So every day, almost each or even each critical infrastructure operator, government agency, enterprise, it detects tens of different phishing emails. Some of them assembled really nicely in terms of that they are quite effective, that the message which is created in local language. Sometimes it has mistakes, sometimes it doesn't, and it always uses the current media context, meaning that if something has happened in the country, they're trying to leverage that. So we stopped distinguishing one campaign from another. It's all one single big campaign. And this is also, in my opinion, quite important indicator. If you see currently, as Katerina said, if you see the downtrend in the activity, right? So apart from the question, what infrastructures actually monitor, what are their capabilities? Because back in 2014, we had very poor capabilities of seeing what is actually happening. I don't even say about an analysis of what was happening, but at least to be technically capable to detect, to see, and then to decide what you want to see in this amount of data, right? Besides that question, what we also observe is that before 24th of February, before I would say 16th of January, when the first massive attacks were happening, during the New Year time and the Christmas time, everything was quite calm, right? So nothing was saying that in a week or two or three would have massive cyber attacks. So in my opinion, this is also kind of a sign that either the preparation or equipment phase has already finished, right? That is why you don't see this basic DDoS, phishing, and all this stuff, which is quite easy to see. And it's probable that it's just the switching between the first stage and the second stage. Yeah, this is pretty much it what I wanted to say. Thanks. You're muted.
Of course, traditional. So maybe we'll proceed to the next section with this concrete examples, and you actually already talked about them a little bit, but Roman or Artem, you can answer. What have you actually learned about cybersecurity from more than 8 years of war? What should organizations around the world take into account now, and what is actually your recommendations?
Well, I can start. So we learned a lot. Basically, it was a common saying that Ukraine has been served as a cyber lab, or cyber warfare lab, something like that. But in real, it was a real hybrid war. And what we need to understand is that cyber attack doesn't come alone. Basically, it's in, let's say, if a good planning, cyber attack is the part of more complex operation. Specifically, through the cyber vector, adversaries can affect kinetic world, like we had the power grid attacks in Ukraine, specifically in 2015, Prekarpattia Oblenergo, in 2017, the distribution substation of our national power grid operator. And in 12th of April, there was an announcement about cyber attacks on Vinnytsia Oblenergo, another one distribution substation. So these cyber attacks, they were realized throughout the cyber means completely, affecting the physical, let's say, affecting the OT, ICS controllers, and through that affecting kind of kinetic worlds. But thanks to our, let's say, I wouldn't say low automation, but the presence of manual controls, the operators, after the cyber attack happened, they managed to take the grip back within, let's say, hours or even less. So we didn't lost energy for a longer period, which could cause a real disaster in case of the winter frozen period. Let's say the central heating pipes could be damaged seriously, and that could be much more dramatic and long-lasting effect. But aside of that, and aside of PsyOps operations and some information, let's say, campaigns, propaganda or disinformation, cyber attacks oftenly is the part of a more complex operations. And two things that are important: nobody is immune, so every organization could be affected. Whether organization could serve as the ultimate target in case of critical infrastructure operator, for instance, or could serve as the gateway to the ultimate target or ultimate objective. Because this persistence is about continuous attempts to intrude, and then once intrude, the adversaries escalated their privileges and captured the infrastructure. This foothold could be, let's say, could be traded or used for some another stage of cyber operations. So nobody immune, and even very simple exercises like cybersecurity culture or cyber hygiene plays important role in organizational resilience. I'm not saying about protecting your critical assets, specifically data, specifically credentials or identity, user identity, because that's these assets oftenly being captured and used by adversaries. So I would say in general, the recommendations are the same. Cybersecurity and organizational resilience is a process of implementing effective defense solutions, technologies, of constant learning and nurturing cyber culture within the organization, cyber hygiene, I wouldn't say cyber propaganda, right? And also cybersecurity operations, detection and response, which let's say have quite a high price for a medium or small company, but there are a lot of managed security services proposals. So cybersecurity operations, detection and response, and proactive cyber, or I would say even cyber readiness. That's the simulations, technical like penetration tests or application security, and organizational like tabletop exercises, checking the, let's say, the procedures, response plans. So everything plays important components, and everything is complementary to each other. So there is no kind of a silver bullet. It's always about the complex of all these organizational and technical processes. And so I would say cybersecurity should be in the design of every business. Commencing day one, the top management should treat cybersecurity as the essential component of the business processes.
Yeah, that was probably, yeah. If you could, Artem, add something.
Yeah, maybe since the question was, the initial question was about the kind of lessons learned, right? It's about the what we have learned, about what high level conclusions we could make, because to be honest, I understand, Roman, it's very hard to explain what we have learned for 8 years. I think we need to cancel all our meetings for today, tomorrow, and the next month, right? And to have the audience stay with us for a lot of time. But you know, the high level things, apart from what Roman has mentioned, and I fully support every word Roman said, is that critical infrastructure conclusion, right? Critical infrastructure is not always what is listed in the official papers, right? And it's not only about energy or telecom. Critical infrastructure, especially under the war conditions, you know, nearly any industry becomes critical infrastructure because of the avalanche effect. Because, for instance, if the citizen can't simply make a payment, the cell phone doesn't work, he can't buy a ticket for a bus to run away, and simultaneously missiles are flying and bombing across the country, it really borns this panic effect, which is the ultimate goal for the adversary, to make all the processes, government, public, enterprise processes, civil processes, unmanageable, right? So it's very important to not to underestimate the value of even retail stores, because we had these issues of supplying the products, right? And retail stores are also highly digitalized companies right now. Everything is empowered with computers, right, and the internet and the connection. So by the way, very good example of resistance to this kind of adverse reactions is you might have heard that SpaceX has provided a certain amount of Starlinks for Ukraine, and it was like a additional layer of redundancy for having the connection, apart from what our ISPs have done, because they've done also a tremendous job. And we're kind of lucky because historically Ukraine is covered with a lot of fiber optics networks, and it's very hard to disconnect Ukraine from the global web, and still it's possible. So when we had this Starlinks deployed across the country, adversaries decided to attack simultaneously our ISPs and the SpaceX, right, in order to try to at least interfere somehow. But the good sign that actually they had no luck, right? And it means that the redundancy of big networks and constant connectivity is a must-have, right, during this time. So it's a conclusion number 2 from my side. And obviously the detection capabilities, it's all about monitoring and not about sending the logs, because if you send logs, it becomes additional bookshelf in your closet. You need to read these books, right? So you need to think of how you use these logs when you send them to the correlation. And I haven't seen successful examples when the company first sent all the logs to the database and then retrospectively they try to search for something. It simply doesn't work like that. For this actually reason, there is a compromise assessment approach, all right? It's a regular health checkup, and the conclusion number 4 is that there is never enough of this health checkup. So we see that those companies which do this type of exercises more often, they have higher capabilities to resist, they have higher capabilities to detect and to respond properly. So this is something which should be paid attention to.
Yeah, Roman had something to add. If you have short addition, and then we have here a couple of answers.
Thanks, Lauri. I dare to add just a very short one, because I was talking about the organizational level. In a nutshell, specifically after NotPetya attack, the organizations in Ukraine, private business and public organizations, they started to issue more budgets for cybersecurity. Basically, that's a good token of they took it serious. And for government, specifically last year in August, we have adopted new cybersecurity strategy, a 5-year cybersecurity strategy. So currently we are implementing this strategy. Some progress were made in the energy sector specifically, and in critical infrastructure in general. So we are, let's say, and government specifically foster that to organizations to unite, to cooperate, to provide effective and efficient threat intelligence exchange mechanisms, and even in education. So we have introduced last year, I mean in Ukraine, new professions. So we have an official clarifications and official professions for cybersecurity. Before it was just a single one. So some progress has been made, and a lot of development projects now operating in Ukraine, a lot of international assistance. So we do progress. We do progress in that. So we have let's say digested data attacks. Also, even coming back to organizational resilience, at least Ukrainians now are good in recovering the infrastructure. So the time period after the infrastructure has been compromised and the adversary has culminated the cyber attack, the period of dwell time, let's say non-operational periods, has been reduced also. So there are some incident response plans, backups, and other things that are important to be in place, to be ready.
Yes, thank you. And well, let's have a couple of answers from this side. Katarina, what impact have cyber attacks had on functioning of society, or what examples have you encountered in your career?
Well, if we go back not such a long time ago in a far galaxy not so far away, so if we go back already 15 years, what you could see very much was a situation when cyber experts tried to talk about cyber threats and also possibility of nation states. We were told that this is science fiction and you need to go back to your basements and eat more pizza and drink more Coke because this has no relevance to the real world. Then in 2007 came first the Tallinn attacks, where the bronze statue was moved from one place to the other, which followed the riots in the street and also massive denial of service attacks on Estonian infrastructure, which basically cut off Estonia from the internet for a couple of days. Then similar attacks 1 year later on in Georgia. Okay, so this was clearly a sign that there is some state-based activity going on, but then we were tackled with the question that yes, these were technically very, very simple attacks, so maybe not so relevant after all, or are they? Well, then in 2010 came Stuxnet, which was another game changer because this was a very complex cyber attack where you could clearly see that there was a malware that was tailored to operate in a certain environment. And one thing, or some things that were pretty significant, was first of all, it was clearly a nation state because already because of the resources. This could not have been done by a hobbyist group. The other thing that happened was this was maybe the first clear example of a cyber attack also affecting the physical world because some of the centrifuges physically broke down. And 3, there was the question of this malware jumping the air gap. So before that, you already heard that if we don't connect things to the internet, then we are safe, right? Well, wrong. So this also proved that. And I think as a result of this, many nations started to think that we need to have a national cybersecurity strategy to think out how we need to tackle these issues, because clearly there are criminals and there are nation states operating, and probably other groups as well. And we realized that, for example, you can't give the task of cybersecurity just to one entity. So we have the police, we have the armed forces, we have the cyber centers, but we also have the private sector, we have the academia. So who should do what, and what is the responsibility, and what is the meaning of international collaboration? So I think this process really started on a political level after these attacks. Then we started to see attacks on critical infrastructure, Ukraine being one main, but there was also, for example, the world's largest bank heist in 2016, where you could see North Korea trying to gain money for their own needs. Then there came the WannaCry attacks, ransomware. Ransomware was nothing new per se, but on this scale it was, and again you could see nation states behind them. Then we had SolarWinds, which was a supply chain attack, showing that it's not enough to protect your own organization, but you also have to look at the supply chain and how well they are protecting their organizations. Then came the COVID pandemic, and then we could again see activity in the cyber world. So nation states trying to spy and collect intelligence, for example, to get information on vaccine research, but also criminals trying to fool people who were desperate to get some sort of help or remedies or vaccines, etc. So this was again lucrative for the criminals. So I think that what has happened during this last 15 years, and now looking at the war in Ukraine, nobody is anymore saying to cyber experts that go back to your basement, this is science fiction. So this has become something very much of the real world, and the cyber domain is maturing to a domain in warfare such as land, air, and sea. So this may be the first time in a full-scale conventional war, but it will not be the last time. This will be the new normal in this sense. So this is a brief sum up of the last 15 years, in my opinion.
I may add some maybe more on kind of on the commercial side. The most attacked industries at the moment are manufacturing companies and to some extent critical infrastructure, because they just simply don't have the experience, history, or manpower or systems readiness to protect the same way as big banks, like for instance. This was also noted by IBM's X-Force threat intelligence this year. And we've definitely seen a kind of not a panic, but a rapid movement in manufacturing companies to move forward in simply putting their cyber defenses up in a better way. Just having VPNs or monitoring network traffic is hardly enough for protecting. And I would categorize these mishaps or in different categories. One is carelessness, human errors, too complicated systems, lack of automation, legacy systems which are not up to date, patching is not done, there are poor or no backups for restoring data. Simple things. I mean, 90% of these cyber attacks come from human errors or credentials like passwords or private keys in the wrong hands, however they were obtained. And then you have the secure remote access. Now, when companies move to Industry 4.0 and truly remote access, then that has to be really protected. And we have the example of Florida Water, for instance, where remote access was open with TeamViewer, which is fairly easy to crack. And a hacker could threaten people to put more than 10,000 ppm of lye into the drinking water, which would be critically dangerous for the municipality people in there. Or Colonial Pipeline, where the attack came from IT side of, not OT side, but IT side of it. But then they had to stop the operations. And in America, when people can't get gas for their cars, they start whoring for it. It becomes a panic, anarchy altogether. The third is this simply monetizing, threatening to stop production for ransomware, or have access to or stolen data. Data, IPR, intellectual property right data, has value. It's sellable on the market, so you can monetize that. We have the sad example here is Nokian Tires, the Finnish tire manufacturer, which 10 employees took papers and documents with them, and now you have Black Donut operating in Russia and in the Arab environment, producing similar tires with no R&D involved, right? And then the court systems and legislation and the work of police, cybercrime pays off, right? They're not caught as easily as typical criminals. And then you have the supply chain ripple effects, like Katarina was saying. We have an interesting example with a German manufacturer who was supposed to start implementation with cybersecurity defenses with us, and they were hacked. They had to stop all of their production. They make heating systems for cars. Now, what happens is that you can't buy an electric vehicle at the moment. The lead times are more than a year because they don't have a gasoline engine which would heat the car. So you need a heater. But the guys who are managing the heaters are under attack, and they can't get enough hardware and IT stuff at the moment to get back into production. So it's a ripple effect in the whole supply chain. And then you have the new really big thing, maybe a bit outside of the manufacturing or OT or nation state, is identity thefts, right? Mm-hmm. We were having dinner with our kids because in Finland we have a psychotherapy company that was hacked and the identities were stolen because they forgot to turn their VPN back on. The database was called database. The password was password 01, and there were no backups of it. So, but we got my kids. Well, they're adults now. They got Bitcoin ransomware on one Saturday evening over dinner. So I've seen this happening right in front of my eyes. Lynn, who's working for us in the US, in New York, her identity was stolen in New York, and somebody took fringe benefits for unemployment on her behalf onto some other bank account in New York, because it's enough to have, name, address, and social security number. Yep. Many systems are still so old-fashioned. No secure authentication of the real user itself. So this is just happening. We could go on and on, but I will stop right now here.
Yeah, thank you. And I think at this point we'll proceed to our third and last section, which is concrete solutions. So maybe we'll get back to you, Roman and Artom, and if we could end this section in 5 minutes, so we will have enough time also for questions. So let's wrap up thing in speech. How we can operate in this new cybersecurity environment. So ESSP, what solutions is there to help organizations?
Okay, I will start, but probably Artem will finish with more details. As I said, there is nothing has been changed since we see new and new cyber attacks. Because for instance, our company, we specialized in digital investigations, and so we investigate the case after adversaries, let's say, after they culminate in the infrastructure. So we diligently restore the timeline, and we examine all the methods and tactics that they are using. And I would say that's one common conclusion that unites all the investigations we have done so far, is that the tools and techniques they utilize and exploit very common mistakes, like patching or vulnerabilities and non-patching, and user behavior, or let's say phishing, social engineering, because nobody, let's say, after the cyber attack has happened, everybody knows about that, but nobody kind of announced that the company X, let's say, patched all their perimeter. So nobody stated. It's a kind of very it's understandable, it's very common, it should be operationally kind of continuous operation with the organization. So for organizations, what's the solution? First of all, is the top management should buy in cybersecurity and understand what cybersecurity is, and what are cyber threats, and why cyber risks currently treated as top 5 worldwide risks for economies. Let's start from that point. And unfortunately or fortunately, we have a lot of lessons to be learned still, and to talk about and to explore for the management and government to better protect and to build cybersecurity capacities, as with the organization with the same on a nationwide scale. Artem, maybe you have some more actionable, let's say, advice.
Yeah, I try to unmute myself. Well, I actually recently thought about the question: what has really changed for the last decade in terms of cybersecurity approaches, methodologies, and the way we started to work from certain points, or let's say what has changed during the 10 years in general. And from one side, we had experienced so many shifts of the paradigm, right? You remember the times when everything was about antivirus. So if you have antivirus, then you're secure. Then we switched to what was next. I would say probably the next was logs, all about logs. Let's correlate, let's buy SIEMs, log solutions, etc. Then EDR, then MDR, then zero trust. Then by the way, COVID, right? COVID, which has, by the way, has helped us a lot with preparing to what we experience right now. Because after, you remember the COVID night, the first COVID night when everybody went work from home, right? Switch to this mode. And it was a terrible experience that most of the infrastructure were so vulnerable for a long time. And a lot of APTs and massive attacks were very successful in taking over the infrastructures. Now most of the world is prepared for switching to more online rather than offline, or more remote rather than on premise. But anyway, we are progressing as cyber security industry. We are progressing, developing new tools, approaches, etc. But on the other hand, adversaries do the same. Right? They also implement AI. They also implement complicated technical solutions, and they have salaries, they have offices, right? They have support teams like Cobalt, right? The one which recently we hear a lot, the group from Russia, which is hired by the actual state actor, right, to support them in the activities, which is, by the way, as a trend, interesting by itself, because government barely capable of managing all such complicated and complex attacks. So they need some support from commercial sector, and it is a commercial sector. So it seems that everything has changed, right? But when I try to understand and when I analyze this, in the end we have the first principles the same. It's about risk-oriented approach. It's about full coverage, right? You can't just simply buy a tool or 2 or 3 tools and you would have a security. You need to pay attention to IT, to OT processes, to culture in the organization. The information about cyber risk should be disseminated across the whole organization, right? Every employee should act as a first firewall, and the employee was always and still is the weakest point in the whole ecosystem of cybersecurity. But at the same time, we see that some still old kind of approaches, but maybe a little bit remastered, are working pretty well. And we inhaled a new life in cyber hygiene projects, and we understood that it's actually a national task to disseminate this information, not only within this certain particular commercial organization or government organization. It's actually about launching the national campaigns, about explaining to people, teaching people that cyber is no longer a nice and healthy place. You need to be cautious when you're in cyber, right? It's you lock your door when you go home, so do the same with cyber. And regular health checkups, right? We used to have once per year, 2 times per year a pen test, but pen test just shows you the current vulnerabilities which you close next week, and then you actually need to do new pen test, but you wait for 6 months more until you need to do that. So compromise assessment has changed this as well. The same with commercial SOCs. It was a low level of trust to hire external SOC, Security Operations Center. Now it changes because the reality of not being capable to build good SOC internally, or you are capable but it's very limited in its capabilities. It's no longer, it's more important, this understanding, than to make this step to trust somebody from external side. And all this has started to change, and all this in a synergy has played its role, its positive role. So yeah, probably it's a bit longer than 5 minutes. I see. I have overtook 3.
We listen because we talk concrete examples, but we have 7 minutes of our show left, so I suggest that at this point, Rami and Katarina, maybe Rami, you could tell shortly how SSH can help, and then I have a couple of questions. So
yeah, let's keep it short. I think it's if you can answer the basic questions of what are my most critical systems? What is my critical data, whether it's secret, confidential, restricted, or authenticated data, kind of an onion model of data. So where is it? Who and what can access it, and with what secrets? And is the data and the communication encryption safe for the next generation or next era, which is quantum? And so is it quantum safe for the future when current algorithms are at risk? If you can answer all of those and you have protected that well, then you don't need any solutions. But if there are some gaps or loopholes there, then just make sure that when you manage sensitive data, that you have proper tools for it, and put in place proper access management, strong authentication, get away from passwords, get away from keys that can be shared or sold. Only authenticate for the job to be done at the time to be done, so just in time, just enough access methods, and then put proper auditing and monitoring and recording in place, and have proper, like Artem said, proper security operations centers for the observation and quick response then when something goes sour.
Yes, that was very good pitch. So I have a couple of questions and I will address them. We have 5 minutes left of our time, and maybe Katarina could start, and if you guys have something to add. Question is, can you comment on the measures used to address inside and close access threats? Have there been lessons learned?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Can you comment on the measures used to address insider and close access threats?
Oh, you mean insider threats? Insider threats.
Sorry.
Yes. Yes, insider threats, I think, are in a sense the nastiest ones, because we still have largely a security culture where we think that the security threat is coming from outside, although it is, I would say, almost standard practice that to have a mole inside. And for example, if we look at things going on in the darknet, for example, and I take this example from the finance world, what you can see is being sold. There can be sold vulnerabilities to banking systems, or there can be sold information that has been leaked, but you can also see kind of personnel being sold, that access to personnel within some organization is up for grabs. So even that kind of moles can be on sale in the markets. How to catch them and how to measure them is, of course, a tricky question. You need to have inside monitoring as well to be able to see if there is some anomalies in, for example, in how someone's behavior. Is someone accessing or trying to access information that that person should not be able to access, and so on and so forth. And in many cases, these people do get caught. But of course, then there's also the question of the reputation of the organization, that, okay, we had a mole. So it's a nasty situation with insiders.
Yeah. 1 minute for you guys. Have you something to add for the question?
I would say that it will be much more easier if the organization identified the critical, let's say not critical, let's say identified data assets and implement minimum privileges principle, or let's say essential privileges. So first of all, if there is an access of a particular employee that he doesn't use within the regular work or job, that's a potential hole for unintentional, even let's say insider threat. So the employee or the user even could be a victim of his identity, could be a victim of the cyber adversaries. So there is no external attacks anymore. Identity has to be compromised, and the adversary is inside your infrastructure. So that's the problem. And the process called threat hunting, continuous process of revealing anomalies and in user behavior, or some technical pre-programmed scripts or something that's inside of the infrastructure. That's the game changer, how cybersecurity teams can prevail in their objective to find the insider. that could be adversary from outside, but acting as an insider because the identity has been compromised. So 3 suggestions. First, identify your data and critical data, and establish the minimum access privileges, and do, let's say, internal cybersecurity operation like threat hunting.
Yes. Thank you, and it's always very sad to end conversation when it's just starting. Roman, 10 seconds.
Just one, the final one, but very important. Protect your identity. It's very important. So read off passwords, 2-factor authentication, specifically for highly privileged users. Only 2-factor authentication, certificates, or at least session passwords. But identity is the key to the infrastructure. Now infrastructure has been exposed in the cloud, on the land, on premise, on-prem, and and identity is something that interconnects all these parts of the infrastructure, and that should be wrapped in security and monitoring.
This is very, very important. Sorry, just I can't not say, because very important is that everything is right. I fully support to everything we just discussed and I have heard. It's just very important to understand that the mindset should be kind of specific. You need to assume compromise, right? You need to constantly think that you already hacked. In this sense, cybersecurity operations is more similar to counter-intelligence rather than to intelligence. You constantly try to find adversary inside rather to find the friend outside, right? So this is very important, even with zero trust implementation, even with the correct set of privileges, even with identity protection, you still always have this probability to have insider threat active right now. So to track the changes, to track the user behaviors, it's vital.
Yes,
thanks.
Thank you. But now, unfortunately, I must say that we are over time. So let's keep this in mind, that protect your identity. I think this is good end to our roundtable. Thank you a lot, Katarina, Rami, Roman, and Arton for discussion. Thank you, audience. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but the recording of the roundtable will be available on our internet site. And of course, please always send questions to us. We are willing to help with you. SSH and ESSP are willing to protect your critical data and identity. So thank you and see you next time. We will have more webinars and podcasts and content with ESSP later autumn. So stay tuned.